Lesson 136, Formal and Informal Speech. In this lesson, I would like to talk a little bit about a topic that, as English speakers, we don't really deal with as much as other people do in other languages. And what I'm talking about here is the difference between speaking in a kind of an informal way and speaking in a more formal way. In English, we have certain ways of speaking formally. We can use the word sir or ma'am if we want to show respect to someone. But in other languages, they have other ways that are tied into the way they use verbs and pronouns. And you'll see this in German, you'll see this in French, you'll see this in Russian. So what I'm talking about here is using verbs and pronouns in unusual ways as a certain scripted kind of way of speaking to someone in a formal or respectful way. Other languages do this, but in English we generally don't. So in this lesson, I want to describe some of this to you so you can begin to picture in your mind how this formal speech works. Because we're going to see it in German. We're going to start to study it in German. But before we get there, I want to introduce it to you and get you thinking about this kind of speech. And in this lesson, I have a little thought experiment or imaginary story here about a butler who is in the service of the queen. And so we have two conversations happening here. We have some conversation between the butler and one of his fellow butlers. And then we have some conversation happening between the butler and the queen. And here's the difference. When the two butlers talk to each other, they are on the same social level. So they can talk to each other in an informal kind of way. But when the butler talks to the queen, he's not going to talk to the queen in the same way that he would talk to his buddy or his friend. The queen is of very high social or political rank, so he's going to show her special respect in the way he talks to her. So that's the difference here in the two ways of speaking that we're going to look at. One is informal between two people of the same social rank, and formal speech between a person and someone of a much higher social standing or social rank. And so as we study this phenomenon, we're going to look at how they use pronouns. Back in the kitchen, the butler is talking to his fellow butler, or perhaps as it says here, the cook, and he uses the word you. He says, you usually drink tea. What is the word you here? The word you is a pronoun. It's second person singular. So take mental note of that. He's using the second person singular to talk to his coworker, the cook. Usually the cook drinks tea, but this time the butler notices that the cook is drinking coffee. So he makes the comment, you usually drink tea. Now let's look at that same statement, but in a completely different context. If the queen usually drinks tea, but she asks for some coffee, the butler might comment and say, Your Majesty usually drinks tea. Notice that the butler is not speaking to her in the same way. He does not say, you usually drink tea. Instead, what the butler does is he uses this special title of respect, Your Majesty, and now he is speaking to her in the third person. This special title of respect, Your Majesty, becomes a third person singular kind of title, and it takes a third person singular verb, which is the verb drinks. So Your Majesty drinks, that's third person stuff there. When he talks to his buddy, the cook, back in the kitchen, he says, you drink. That's a second person pronoun and a second person verb. So what can we notice from this? We can notice that when the butler wants to speak in a very formal way, he switches and begins to speak in the third person. He goes from second person to third person. This is very important. Instead of saying, you drink, he says, Your Majesty drinks. Switching from second person to third person. Another example, if you're in a courtroom, when you speak to the judge, you won't say, you are welcome to see the document. You use this special title of respect, Your Honor. You say, Your Honor is welcome to see the document. Again, Instead of saying you are welcome, that's second person, we switch to third person. We use this special title of respect, Your Honor, along with a third person verb. And we say, Your Honor is welcome. Again, the same thing. We have switched from second person speech to third person speech. So you might be asking yourself, why do we do this? Why is it that when we want to show formality or respect, why do we switch from second person to third person? The basic answer to this question, the way it's been explained to me, is that if you say the word you to someone, you drink tea, you are welcome to see the document, it suggests a feeling of closeness and familiarity with someone, that you know them. But if you speak in the third person and say, Your Majesty drinks tea, or Your Honor is welcome, when you speak in the third person like that, it creates a bit of distance between the person speaking and the person being spoken to. It's more business-like. It's more hands-off. It's got a little bit of distance in there. If you speak to someone with the word you, it might suggest that you are chummy with them, that you're buddies or friends. But in the third person, it creates a feeling of distance, like you don't think you are quite so chum-chum with that person. So this is the basic idea of formal speech in German. You're going to use third-person pronouns and third-person verbs to talk to someone instead of speaking to them with second-person pronouns and second-person verbs. And when you do that, it's going to communicate a feeling of greater formality. And this is very important in German conversation, in German language study. This is a very important concept. So in the next few lessons, we will delve even further into this topic.